Unseen Enemy by Matt Edzan. Narrated by Matt Edzan. Part 4. Chapter 25. Shuttle to Axis Space. Multiple red warning icons appeared across the command console as an alarm went off. "We've been hit," Shirley shouted as she glanced out the viewport. The shuttle began to plummet rapidly. Siobhan grabbed hold of the controls and tried to level off the shuttle. Shirley held onto her seat tightly as she watched the surface grow larger and larger by the second. She didn't know if the young XO could get control back of the shuttle. The shuttle began to spiral in its descent. She had been tempted to take control of the shuttle, but she wasn't as familiar with the human controls. That had been an oversight. She should have gotten the humans to train her on flying their shuttle before embarking on this mission. Whether the humans would have agreed to that was a different matter. Shirley turned to face Siobhan and was stunned to see that the XO was calmer than her. A steady determination had set in her eyes as the young XO continued to wrestle with the controls. She kept pressing on the command console as she held onto the controls. Siobhan switched off the alarm as another explosion rocked the rear of the shuttle. "Shields are at 30%, Siobhan hollered. "Can you see the vessels targeting us?" "No." Shirley had tried her best to identify where the vessels were, but the downward trajectory of the shuttle made it difficult. Meanwhile, the atmosphere's disruption of the sensors made it also impossible to detect the source of the weapons fire. The Toaxi must have been patrolling the area and detected them. That could be the only answer she could come up with. Shirley grimaced. She should have known better than to walk into a trap. The eastern part of T-Shock was supposed to be empty. She recalled that none of the Toaxi species ventured out to the eastern continent. That was what she had been told during her last visit to the planet. But she couldn't recall the reason for the Toaxi not venturing out to the eastern part of the planet. Then her eyes widened. A series of tall spiral towers began to appear in the distance. Soon they took possession of most of the viewport. There was a glass pyramid at the top of each spiral tower. "I don't believe it," Shirley murmured, as her eyes witnessed the spiral towers. Where had these spiral towers come from? She blinked her eyes a few times, but it didn't make a difference. The spiral towers were still there. Around the spiral towers were smaller structures that were laid out in concentric circles. Even the capital city of T-Shock couldn't measure up to the majesty of the spiral towers. They were both elegant and defiant as they rose up in the deserted landscape. During her last visit to the Toaxi capital city, she recalled that most of the structures had been at most 3 to 4 levels. Nothing like this. A few moments later, the shuttle began to level off. A smile curved around Shirley's mouth. The XO had done it. She was impressed with the young XO. Despite her lack of experience, she had wrestled back control of the shuttle. Siobhan remained silent as the shuttle began to reach the surface. "Hold on," Siobhan shouted. "It's going to be—" Then another explosion rocked the shuttle and it went careening to the ground. The shuttle crashed into the desert and Shirley blacked out. Shirley felt a massive pain on her head. She tried to open her eyes. The pain was all over her body. She didn't know if anything inside of her was broken or not, but that didn't matter. Not at the moment. She slowly turned her head to the left. Siobhan was in her seat. The human HUD was still in place. Initially, she had been uncomfortable wearing it, but had forced herself to master using the HUD. Shirley activated it and was glad that Siobhan had gone through the use of the HUD with her before they had launched out of the UHA Hornet. Shirley used the HUD to scan the XO's body. Siobhan was alive but unconscious. Shirley was relieved that the XO hadn't gone through the shuttle viewport. If that had happened, the human would have been instantly dead. Shirley tried to unbuckle her restraints, but it was all twisted up. A strong smell of smoke was coming from behind her. Shirley pulled out a blade and used it to break off the restraint. It took a few jabs before the restraint broke into two. She then pulled off the restraint and leaned over to check on Siobhan. The female human was still breathing. Shirley breathed a sigh of relief. She used her blade to cut off the buckles around Siobhan's body. They needed to get out of the shuttle as quickly as possible. Shirley tried to stand up from her seat. She grabbed the top of her seat as her feet nearly gave way under her. She stood and looked behind her. There were sparks flying all over with cables jutting out. Despite that, the path to the hatch door was clear. She pulled Siobhan to her feet and began slowly dragging the female human towards the hatch door while avoiding the tangled mess of metal and cables. The young Exo's lighter weight helped them move more quickly to the hatch door. As she reached the hatch door, Shirley felt a sound. Siobhan was waking up. She pushed the female human against the wall and gave her a minute. Siobhan opened her eyes and began coughing. What happened? What happened was that you managed to save us from death by getting the shuttle to the surface, Shirley said. She had to give credit where it was due. They wouldn't have even made it to the surface without the Exo's ability to navigate the vessel while avoiding many direct hits from the enemy vessels. Siobhan coughed a few more times before she turned towards the hatch door. We need to get out of the shuttle, Shirley agreed. She pointed her weapon at the hatch door and fired at it. The hatch door blew open. Shirley helped Siobhan stagger out of the shuttle. There were a few hills to the right, while the looming city with its spiral towers appeared at least a few days' walk away. Shirley never imagined that her return to Tishok could have come any sooner. When she had left Imperial Command, the Toaxi homeworld had not even registered as a possible destination, and yet here she found herself again. However, the Toaxi homeworld she fondly recalled of had undergone a transformation. Looking around, Shirley knew they couldn't stay out here at the site of the shuttle. Those enemy vessels would be back to check for survivors and finish what they started. She observed that the Exo had activated her own HUD and was looking around the terrain. Shirley looked at Siobhan. We need to race to those hills. It's our only chance. Are you ready? Chapter 26. Bridge, UHA Hornet. Captain, the probes we sent out near Tishok are sending in data, the sensor officer reported. You need to take a look at this. Send it over to my console, Gibson ordered. It had been over an hour since the shuttle with Siobhan and Shirley had left the UHA Hornet. As they had decided to maintain comm silence, Gibson had ordered probes to be launched around the eastern part of Tishok. He had intentionally withheld the information about the probes from his Exo and Shirley because he didn't want them to send anything to them and thereby reveal their positions. The purpose of the probes was to help monitor the shuttle. He didn't know if that was possible or not. It all depended on the orbital defenses around Tishok and any other defenses within the atmosphere. Unfortunately, UHA records had minimal information on Tishok, but he felt the chances of the Toaxi having such advanced sensor arrays and orbital defenses were minimal. At least he hoped so. The first data arrived on his console. Gibson grimaced. The shuttle had been attacked right after the point of entry into the atmosphere. The readings indicated that the shuttle hadn't detected the Toaxi vessels on an intercept course with it. Gibson found that strange. His Exo was well trained in navigation, and according to her profile had excelled in combat as a pilot. But, of course, that was in a training setting. Gibson sighed. Had he made a mistake sending his own Exo down there? Should he have instead gone himself? It was too late to second-guess his decisions. Is there any more data? Gibson asked. Negative, sir, the sensor officer replied. I don't know why, but it's as if the shuttle just disappeared off the grid. Gibson sensed the despair in the air. The sensor officer's words had sucked out any hope in the bridge. The body language of his crew spoke volumes of what they were feeling. He had also noted from the probe readings that the atmosphere on the planet wasn't that stable. That could be another reason for the shuttle disappearing off the grid. Are we able to launch another probe, but this time to the surface? Gibson inquired. Not without being detected, the sensor officer said. Gibson bit his lip. He had lost all connections with the shuttle. Had the shuttle exploded or crashed? He hoped for the latter. He had to trust in his Exo's capabilities. He also couldn't discount the female Poruk. After all, she was a capable captain. Shirley should be able to handle such situations. He doubted both of them were lost. All they could do now was wait for the shuttle to complete its mission. If that wasn't possible, he was certain his Exo or Shirley would try to find a way to contact them. Sir, what do we do? The sensor officer asked. Let's give them a bit more time, Gibson replied. With the interference from the atmosphere, there can be any number of reasons for what's going on. It was too soon to call the shuttle mission a failure. He needed to give his Exo and Shirley a chance, but time was not on his side. Right after the shuttle had launched, he had received an encrypted transmission from UHA Central. Rear Admiral Hutchinson had highlighted that another enemy vessel had appeared around Beta 7. However, this time the enemy vessel had done nothing except launch a few probes. UHA had destroyed the enemy probes after their launch. Then the enemy vessel had mysteriously vanished without a trace. Hutchinson suspected it was a precursor to whatever the enemy was planning. Gibson concurred with the Rear Admiral's assessment. Chapter 27, Eastern Continent, T-Shock. The heat crawled across Siobhan's skin as she walked behind Surly. Once out of the shuttle, Siobhan had recovered from the crash. Surly had managed to pass her 2 rifle blasters, one of which she slung over her back. The other was in her arms. Siobhan had also pocketed several grenades. Her HUD kept scanning the terrain, but it didn't detect anything. Siobhan kept looking up at the sky. Where are those vessels that shot at us? I don't know. What do you mean? Surly didn't turn back. I mean, I don't know what's happening on this planet. We are right now on the eastern continent, which is supposed to be deserted. But if you look to your left, you can see a city. That shouldn't be there. It doesn't make sense. Siobhan didn't understand what had spooked the female Poruk. Just because the area had been empty before, it didn't imply that the Toaxi couldn't build on it. Maybe over the last year they had decided to expand their civilization. Building cities was a natural aspiration of many species. Then a sound burst across the sky. Surly didn't flinch. I wouldn't worry about them. They would have spotted our shuttle, but the chances of them picking us out in this atmosphere are low. Siobhan felt Surly was being a bit too overconfident, both in her memories and her reliance on the atmosphere. If the Toaxi can build a city where there should be none and detect us in an atmosphere where the sensor readings go haywire, we should be careful not to assume too many things. Surly stopped, turned and stared at her. You have a point. We need to move quickly. I don't like being in the open. Siobhan agreed as they broke into a run. Several minutes later they reached the first hill. Fortunately, they hadn't encountered any weapons fire. Siobhan was panting as she leaned against the rocks jutting out of the hill. Surly seemed like she hadn't even broken a sweat. Siobhan guessed the Poruk body was able to function at a higher level in comparison to the human body. Surly pointed ahead. There's a cave up ahead. They walked in the direction of the cave. After they stepped into the cave, Siobhan looked at Surly. How bad was the damage to the shuttle? Surly shook her head. I don't think we can use the shuttle to get off this planet. Siobhan sighed. But the captain doesn't know what happened to us. We need to go back at night to send a transmission to him. It's of no use. Even if we manage to get back to the shuttle, the atmosphere won't allow us to send anything out. Siobhan didn't give up. There must be a way to make contact with our vessel. We have to inform the captain. Surly stared at her for a long moment. What is it with you humans and your never give up attitude? It's what makes us human, Siobhan said with a smile. If that was a Poruk shuttle, we would not only abandon it, but blow it up and move on. Yet you humans are so persistent. You simply refuse to give up no matter how difficult the chance of success. I've never understood your thinking. Siobhan laughed as she sat down on the cave floor. Her laughter created an echo in the cave. She quickly fell silent as Surly passed her a small black packet. What's this? Siobhan asked as she took it into her hands. I forgot to take any liquid when we left the shuttle, Surly admitted, but this ration pack will help you. Siobhan twirled the pack around her fingers. I've never seen such a small one. It's a Poruk pack, Surly smiled. Although it looks small, it will cover all your needs right now. When I came on board your vessel, I brought a lot of them with me. I never go anywhere without them. Siobhan's eyes widened as she opened it up and slipped the powdery contents into her mouth. She coughed a bit before the contents melted in her mouth. As they melted, she felt a sudden refreshing overcome her taste buds. Eventually, the Poruk rations filled her mouth with a more than adequate dose of well-needed liquid. You're right. That was incredible. I would have never expected that to be so filling. Siobhan had never actually tried any rations before in her life. There had been no reason for it. Although UHA also had ration packs, they were bigger and different from the Poruk ones. It was ironic that her first ration pack on her first shuttle mission would end up being an alien one. Despite that, she was glad that Surly had brought them along. Although Captain Gibson had strong suspicions of the female Poruk, Siobhan had always been open to give her a chance, and now, with Surly around, Siobhan felt confident of their chances of survival. Good. We leave once darkness sets in, Surly said. Chapter 28, Bridge, UHA Hornet. Captain, we lost contact with all our probes, the sensor officer reported. Gibson grimaced. That meant only one thing. They had been discovered. It was only a matter of time before the Toaxi triangulated their position. Slowly reverse course and get us away from here, Gibson barked. He felt the UHA Hornet begin to move away from the moon. It was too dangerous to stay in Toaxi space, at least for now. What about Commander Siobhan? The navigation officer asked. It didn't go unnoticed by Gibson that his lieutenant never mentioned the female Poruk. His crew probably had been more than relieved as he had when he had permitted Surly to tag along with his XO. We'll return for them later, Gibson remarked. He didn't know if that was a promise he could keep, but that was the only option left for the time being. His XO and Surly knew of the danger when they had left for the mission. He couldn't risk his entire crew and vessel waiting for them to contact him. Captain, we have 3 Toaxi vessels approaching us, the sensor officer announced. They must have been hiding on the other side of the moon. Gibson bit his lip. Can we jump into hyperspace? They're already here, the sensor officer said. The view screen changed to reveal 3 Toaxi vessels. One of them had a configuration similar to the UHA Hornet. Gibson sighed. The opportunity to jump into hyperspace had passed. If he forced his vessel to attempt a hyperspace jump, it might ram into one or more of those Toaxi vessels. The outcome could be deadly for everyone. The heavy cruiser is hailing us, the comms officer reported. Put them through, Gibson said. The moment the Toaxi captain appeared, Gibson scowled. Of all the Toaxi vessels, why did it have to be the one with a familiar face? Captain Gibson, how nice to see you again, the Toaxi captain sneered. It was evident from the way the Toaxi captain said his name that the Toaxi had been expecting them. Had they just walked into a trap? Captain Rye, Gibson said. He could sense the confusion amongst his bridge crew. They had no idea of his history with the Toaxi Captain Rye, and he had no intention of briefing them about it. You're aware you are trespassing in Toaxi space, Rye said. Really? I didn't know that this part belonged to the Toaxi, Gibson remarked. He needed to buy some time while he thought of his options. The 3 vessels were a formidable foe even for the UHA Hornet. It would be difficult to outrun them without taking on considerable damage. He could launch a full-scale attack on them, but he didn't know how long he could outlast against the Toaxi. The missile tubes and plasma guns on the UHA Hornet would be able to make a significant dent in the Toaxi vessels, but the bigger issue was he didn't know enough of the latest capabilities of the Toaxi. Ever since their earlier encounter with the Toaxi, Gibson was certain the alien species had upgraded itself in many different ways. Then maybe you need to update your star charts, Rai said. The Toaxi are no longer the same species you met years ago. We've changed. I would remind you not to take us as lightly as you did before. While Rai was being arrogant in his assertion that the Toaxi had changed, Gibson couldn't discount the reality that someone had given the Toaxi species access to advanced technology. I can see that, Gibson said dryly. Toaxi's secret new alliance had taken the species to the next level in the galaxy, at least in their technology, but they were still the same Toaxi. He had once defeated them, and it could be done again even if the Toaxi had newer weapons. Well, since we are in your space, we'll head back to the neutral zone, Gibson said. Not so quickly, Gibson, Rice scoffed. The neutral zone is also our space. You shouldn't have come here. We know why you are here. The neutral zone belongs to no one, Gibson repeated. Rai raised his voice. It now belongs to us. I didn't hear any new galactic accords with regards to the neutral zone, Gibson countered. There was no need for galactic accords when we have new and powerful friends, Rye sneered. Gibson touched his chin. Are your friends the same ones who destroyed a Guti outpost? Rye glared at him. How dare you accuse our friends of such unprovoked attacks? Gibson found it interesting that Rye hadn't shown the slightest surprise. It meant that the Toaxi were aware of the destruction of the Guti outpost. Did I accuse you? Gibson asked. He knew he was risking further escalation by this line of questioning. Rye narrowed his eyes. I know what you're trying to do, but it won't work. Stop wasting my time. Prepare to be boarded or suffer the consequences. With that, the view screen went blank. Chapter 29, Bridge, UHA Hornet. What are your orders, sir? The tactical officer asked. It was an understatement to say that the bridge crew was nervous. The moment they launched their crew through those tubes, fire the plasma guns on a spread, Gibson barked. Kill as many of them as you can. Aye, Captain, the tactical officer replied. Gibson didn't care for Captain Rye and his threats. He would deal with the Toaxi just like he had done previously in his attacks on them during the Pinnacle War. In those attacks, he hadn't spared anyone and had destroyed multiple Toaxi vessels. Status? Gibson asked. Nothing, sir, the sensor officer reported. The 3 vessels are holding position. Their launch tubes are closed. Gibson frowned. He didn't like it at all. Something was off. The Toaxi were typically an impulsive species during an engagement. Based on his experience, the Toaxi species rarely spent time thinking about things. Even those they had encountered earlier hadn't taken this long to open their launch tubes and send their crew out. A sound emerged from the back of the bridge. Gibson turned around. Can someone check that out? The officer nearest the lift door strode over to them, but before he could do anything, the lift doors to the bridge slid open and 2 male Toaxi appeared out of nowhere with their weapons. The officer tried to tackle the Toaxi. However, one of the Toaxi kicked him with the butt of his weapon and his officer went down on his knees. Stop them, Gibson shouted as he pulled out his weapon. Somehow the Toaxi had improved on their process of using the alien transport technology. It seemed like they no longer needed to launch anyone out of their missile tubes. 2 more officers rushed at both male Toaxi. One of the male Toaxi slammed one of his officers against the wall. Gibson leveled his weapon and fired it at the first Toaxi, but the Toaxi ducked. 2 more sounds caught Gibson's attention from the left side of the bridge. As he swirled around, 2 more male Toaxi stood with their weapons. His sensor officer rushed towards him, but both Toaxi fired their weapons and his sensor officer went down screaming as he grabbed his leg. One of the Toaxi picked up his sensor officer by the neck and shoved his weapon toward his head. Do not move. Gibson barked, hold your fire. Gibson didn't want to give up without a fight, but his crew wasn't up to it. They were nowhere ready to fight aliens. In the end, his entire crew would be dead. He sighed as he dropped his weapon to the ground. Then there was a buzz on his console. Press on it now, the male Toaxi holding his sensor officer commanded. Gibson narrowed his eyes but didn't make any move. Did you not hear me, you stupid human? The male Toaxi growled. Gibson's shoulders sagged as he pressed on his console. Captain Rye appeared on the view screen. His lips curled into a snarl. Gibson, I told you we have changed. Rye glared. Why did you try to test me? We are now more superior to your pathetic human race. Soon we'll be more powerful than both the human and the Poruk species. Gibson remained silent. For the sake of his crew, there was no point in arguing with the Toaxi captain. He was just gloating in his victory. Just like your doomed shuttle which was destroyed, your mission is over, Rye sneered. You should have never launched that shuttle. What gave you the right to invade our space and gather intelligence on us? Just because you defeated us before, it doesn't mean everything stays the same. All species continue to advance. Maybe humanity has lost its edge. Gibson smirked. I doubt you destroyed my shuttle. You aren't that clever. He noticed Rye's eyes shift a split second too late. Another male Toaxi approached him and hit him on the face with the weapon. The pain blasted over his entire face. Gibson shook his head and spat out some blood. Is that the best you got? Gibson chided. Don't be stupid, Captain, Rye warned. You cannot imagine the pain that awaits you. We have learned new ways of torturing our prisoners. You and your crew will wish you never came here. And finally, humanity will fear the Toaxi. Gibson was angry with himself. He should have known better than to just journey into Toaxi space. It seemed the Toaxi had been monitoring them all this time. They must have been waiting for him and even observed the launch of the shuttle. He shouldn't have fallen into their trap. He hoped that his XO and the female Poruk were still alive. If not, this mission was over even before it had properly begun. Take them to the brig, secure their crew and ship, and meet us at the rendezvous point, Roy ordered. Our masters will be happy. Gibson was disgusted with himself as he looked at the floor. Chapter 30, Eastern Continent Taoiseach. Nightfall had begun to fall over the deserted landscape. Despite that, Shirley still hadn't gotten up from the cave floor. She kept scouring the landscape ahead of them. She had heard stories from the Toaxi species about the hidden dangers on their planet. At that time, she had ignored their tales, but now she was irritated that she hadn't listened more carefully to them. Many things bothered her about the Toaxi. She still couldn't understand how such a species had been able to achieve so many breakthroughs in a short time. Are we going to head out? Siobhan asked. Shirley turned around to find the XO awake. She had let Siobhan catch as much rest as possible. Although the young XO put up a brave face, the female human had no idea of the dangers lurking ahead. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. What's that? Siobhan asked. Initially, Shirley looked confused, but then she realized she was holding the glass-encased purple flower in her right hand. She quickly shoved it back into her pocket. It's nothing. That's not what I saw. Your eyes were so focused on it a few seconds ago. It was like you were somewhere else. Shirley was annoyed with herself for allowing Siobhan to see her with the glass-encased purple flower. She had no intention of discussing her private matters with a human, not the same humans who had made her lose so much. Shirley felt a tinge of anger move within her, but she suppressed it quickly. Shirley stood. It's time we started our journey. Siobhan nodded, stood and straightened her suit out. Shirley was glad the young human hadn't persisted in asking about the purple flower. Which way? Siobhan asked. Shirley gestured to the right. She had no specific route to take. With the sensors not working properly, her device was useless on this terrain. The only marker she could use was that of the city's looming spiral towers far ahead. A few hours later, Shirley stopped. This is as good a place as any to take a short break. Although the sky was dark, the air was still humid. That was one of the things she had forgotten about Taoiseach. She couldn't remember why the planet didn't cool down at night. A female Toaxi had once told her it had something to do with the particles in the atmosphere. Is it always this hot even at night? Siobhan asked. Yes. It was obvious Siobhan was struggling with the heat. Sweat was plastered over her hair as she tried her best to keep the hair away from her face. At that moment, Shirley was glad that the Poruk species didn't have to contend with the issue of hair. Siobhan shuffled her feet. I don't know how they live here in this heat, especially with all that hair on their bodies. I think the Toaxi have learned to adapt. Shirley mused. The heat isn't as bad once you get used to it. She then passed Siobhan another Poruk ration pack. The human swallowed it quickly. Siobhan pointed ahead. What's that? Shirley turned her gaze towards a series of structures on their left. She narrowed her eyes. How had she missed those structures? They seemed to be abandoned. She realized this may not have been the best location at which to take a break. I think we better keep moving, Shirley insisted. Should we investigate them? Siobhan inquired. We don't have time. I don't want to be out here when daylight returns. There was no need to be distracted by the abandoned structures. They needed to get to the city as soon as possible. And why was it necessary to keep talking? Couldn't Siobhan just remain quiet during the journey? Non-stop talking was another one of the human traits she found infuriating. Every time she had visited the mess hall on the human vessel, she had found the noise deafening. It was impossible for anyone to eat in peace in such a human mess hall. Meal times of Porukians were typically one of silence, at least in the tradition of her training. It was a time to focus on mastering the food being consumed instead of idle talk. A sound startled and broke her thoughts. Shirley pulled out a weapon. Siobhan did the same. Where did that come from? Her thoracic senses prickled her. Duck now, Shirley shouted as she dropped to the ground. The first volley of weapons fire slammed into the ground ahead of them. Chapter 31, Eastern Continent, Taoiseach. Who are they? Siobhan asked as more weapons fire whizzed past them. Scavengers, Shirley shouted. Shirley had hoped those tales by the Toaxi had been just that. Tales more than reality. But she had been wrong. Shirley glanced around. They were pinned down by the relentless weapons fire. She calculated it had to be coming from at least several scavengers. The scavengers must have been on the lookout from the structures and detected their presence. This way, Siobhan said. Shirley glanced in her direction. There were a series of boulders a short distance away. Shirley nodded to the XO as she got up and bolted in that direction. She made it behind the boulders as more weapons fire roared past her. We are pinned down here, Siobhan said. Shirley peered around one boulder. Can you see them? Siobhan shook her head as more explosions rocked the ground on the other side of the boulders. Shirley frowned. They couldn't stay here too long. The boulders wouldn't provide sufficient cover. If the scavengers continued to target them, the boulders would eventually be destroyed. Who are these scavengers? Siobhan asked. Shirley hesitated. Former Toaxi who had been cast out of their society. I don't know why it happened, but I heard that such groups of Toaxi existed across Taoiseach. When Shirley had first been told of these groups of Toaxi, she had found the whole situation confusing. There was no equivalent thing in Poruk society to relate to what the Toaxi were doing. The majority of the Poruk followed the lines of life they belonged to. For those who chose not to accept their position in Poruk society, the Poruk Empire had designated colonies where they could live. Many of those who didn't want to abide by the lines of life chose to migrate to those colonies. Despite the migration, the Poruk Empire never abandoned those Porukians. Instead, the Poruk Empire continued to provide support to those colonies. However, many traditional Porukians looked down on those who chose to migrate. Eventually, a decision was made to still support them, but not consider them as part of the empire. In essence, if a war erupted, those colonies were on their own and had to find a way to defend themselves. That compromise had been reached to appease the criticisms of traditional Porukians who frowned on individuals abandoning the lines of life. Although there remained a tension between Porukians and those who migrated out, Shirley felt it was still a better system than what the Toaxi did to their kind by simply throwing them out without any food or support. To Shirley, it was an inefficient way of dealing with individuals who chose not to follow a society's rules. Having scavengers roaming outside of Toaxi society introduced an unknown variable into the equation, and such groups of former Toaxi could eventually become hostile and cause a lot of unnecessary problems. The bombardment of rockets was relentless. The scavengers were determined to harm or kill them. Siobhan turned to her. I don't think they're going to stop. We can't stay here forever. Shirley was aware of that, but she didn't want to argue with the human. Why would they want to attack us? Siobhan asked. We aren't their kind. We are no threat to them. They don't know that. Shirley suspected the scavengers just attacked anyone who came within the perimeter of their compound. During their journey to the city, she and Siobhan must have unknowingly crossed within their perimeter. But they should have been able to easily tell we aren't Toaxi. Even at that distance, it isn't difficult to tell. Shirley didn't understand the point Siobhan was attempting to make. It didn't matter whether the scavengers recognized them as Toaxi or not. To the scavengers, they were just another outsider. The scavengers wouldn't care if they were Poruk or human. Any outsider would be deemed to be a threat to their existence. Scavengers didn't think in the proper frame of mind. I have an idea, Siobhan announced. What are you? Shirley's voice trailed off. Before she could finish her words, Siobhan stood and shouted across the boulders. We are not Toaxi. We come in peace. We were attacked by the Toaxi from that city. Although the rocket fire had stopped prior to the young XO shouting out her own words, the weapon's fire continued to slam into the boulders. The young XO was either incredibly brave or astonishingly stupid. "Get down," Surly barked. Siobhan apparently ignored her. "Our vessel was shot down by the Toaxi from the city. We are not your enemy. I'm coming out with my hands up." Surly jumped to hold on to Siobhan, but she was too late. The female human stepped away from the boulders with her hands in the air. Chapter 32, Eastern Continent Taoiseach. Surly grimaced. What was it with humans? Did they have a death wish? Why couldn't they stop being so impulsive? Why did Siobhan think she could reason with the scavengers? Not every species was willing to talk it out. The young XO was clearly out of her element. Surly waited to hear the next wave of rockets kill Siobhan on the spot, but there was silence. The weapon's fire had died down after Siobhan had spoken the second time. Surly gripped her weapon and waited. It had to be a trick. The scavengers were up to something. They couldn't be trusted. Surly glanced at Siobhan's boots. Siobhan was shuffling her feet. The female human was still alive. Surly didn't know whether to feel relieved or angry. Surly heard a voice. "Don't move at all." It had to be the scavengers. Surly remained behind the boulder. There was no need to reveal herself. Not just yet. If things didn't go the way Siobhan planned, Surly would be forced to intervene. "What are you?" the voice barked. "I am a human," Siobhan replied. "My vessel was shut down by the Toaxi. I am not here to attack you." Surly was impressed that the young XO was so calm in the face of an enemy that had been launching rockets at them. "We shall see about that," the voice scowled. Surly realized that the scavenger voice had doubts about Siobhan's real intentions. "Stay where you are until I tell Grook," the voice announced. "Do not make any sudden moves. There are weapons pointed at your head. If you even move, we will not hesitate to shoot." Grook must have been their leader. Surly wondered what her next move would be. She was glad that Siobhan had chosen her words carefully. The scavenger apparently hadn't been clever enough to check whether there were others with Siobhan. Another deep voice spoke up. "Where's the other one?" "Other one, Grook?" the first voice asked. "We detected two of them walking together," Grook hollered. "Where's the other one?" Surly bit her lip. The scavenger leader had been more observant. She wished the young XO hadn't been so impulsive. She had no choice but to reveal herself. Surly kept the weapon on the ground, stood and joined Siobhan. "I'm here." Standing in front of her were four male scavengers. A burly Toaxi with broad shoulders stood at the center, while a shorter male stood beside him. Surly presumed the burly Toaxi was their leader, Grook. Grook's eyes widened the moment he saw her. Surly knew Grook had recognized him. She remained calm and stared at her. "Grook." "She isn't human," the shorter Toaxi said. Grook grunted. "We all can see that. Captain Surly, you're the last person I would have expected to see out here on the Eastern Continent." Siobhan shuffled her feet but didn't say a word. Surly hoped the XO would keep her mouth shut. She had done enough damage by trying to negotiate with the Toaxi scavengers. "As my comrade told you, we were shot down by Toaxi vessels," Surly replied, calmly. Grook eyed her carefully. He then glanced at Siobhan before returning his gaze to Surly. He then laughed out loud. "The Toaxi were trying to destroy a shuttle with you on board? Have they gone mad?" Surly didn't know how to respond. "We couldn't see their vessels. They came out of nowhere and attacked us." Grook stopped laughing and lowered his voice. "Ever since the Prionen came here, everything has changed." "The Prionen?" Surly asked. Grook looked up into the night sky. "I think it's time we talk somewhere else. I do not know if there are patrols roaming about." Grook turned to the shorter Toaxi scavenger. "Tuli, please escort our guest to the lattice. I'll join you later." With that, Grook walked away with the other two Toaxi scavengers. Surly exchanged glances with Siobhan. Grook had referred to them as guests. Maybe the young XO's impulsive move hadn't been a bad idea after all. "You better pick up your weapons," Tuli advised. Shirley nodded, collected her weapon, and she and Chevron followed Thule towards the structures. Part 4: The End.